Week one is done. We have real data and usage to pour through. And of course, we have plenty of overreacting to do coming out of the first week of the season. I'm John Macri. And for this episode of the PFF Fantasy Podcast IDP edition, I'll be going game by game to break down all of the IDP relevant start sit info that I can handle, you can handle, that we could all handle heading into week two, and making sure that we're not actually overreacting or getting too high or too low coming out of the first week of the season. It's all about trusting the process after all. So let's get it. All right. Like I said, there is a ton of info to get into, coming out of week one. So buckle in because I'm going to try to cover it all while at the same time providing as much matchup and like start sit data as I can for you guys so that you are locked the F in for week two to get a W. Before we do that, though, I have two things to ask of you guys. I know a lot of you have already done this, so thank you all. But first things first, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel. Helps me a ton. Throw a like if you will. It's free. It's just a big help to me. And second, if you want to go even further to support the show and to support me, you could get access to all my written content, which includes the IDP fantasy reports, which houses all of the snap shares for every single IDP, as well as alignment data, man zone coverage rates for teams, my notes, waiver targets, everything that you can possibly need to dominate your IDP leagues. You can subscribe to PFF Plus and use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 for 25% off a PFF Plus subscription. I'll link the week one version of that IDP fantasy report article in the comments below so that you can check it out. It's free this week. I don't think it will be going forward. So check that out. I promise you won't be disappointed because I made that as like the tool that I would want to see if I was consuming IDP content. So I hope you guys find it just as useful. But let's get going here. And remember, as I'm going through like teams and players, don't get caught up in like 1 week's worth of scoring. IDP is a very volatile game. There is a lot of inconsistent production that we have to account for, which is why like the usage and snap shares, all that stuff is so key to track. And it's why I constantly reference it. So we can all kind of do our best to not get too up or too down. Like I said at the top, after just 1 week, we'll give these guys time to deliver as long as we trust the usage and trust the process for the IDP positions, right? Playing time for linebackers, alignment data for DBs, underlying pass rush metrics for our defensive linemen that will all be crucial as we kind of sort through the noise of week one and throughout the season and heading into week two specifically this week. One last thing, we have new matchup charts, which we'll use this week. Shout outs to Victor Ramirez and Edgardo Carrero on Twitter for like the design ideas and help with that the people really seem to like and voted for on Twitter. I really like it as well. So W's in the chat, as they say, for those guys, because they did help come up with those ideas and design. So we'll throw those up today, and hopefully you guys like them. And again, tackle matchup data, all that kind of stuff. It's small sample right now coming out of week one, so you don't have to rely too heavily on this matchup data just yet. I typically like to trust it more coming out of the first month of the season. But since I now have the data, it's there for you guys to peruse on the screen if you so please. And then also timestamps are in the episode description, so you can bounce around, find the teams that you're looking for if you want to hear, about certain players and not every single game, which we're about to start right now. We'll start with the Washington Commanders and the Green Bay Packers on Thursday Night Football. So we'll start with, I guess, the Washington linebackers, right? So the Packers last week, they only had allowed 47 snaps on defense or 48 snaps, whatever it was last week, very low snap count against the Lions. And Jack Campbell specifically, like he was able to come away with 9 total tackles that week against the Packers. That was a 19% tackle rate. That is huge, by the way. But my only concern for the Commanders this week against that same Packers team is that they were, in week one at least, an incredibly man coverage heavy team on defense, right? So we don't usually love that. It also is specific to Frankie Louvu, who is already a tricky one to trust. Like we talked about it a lot in the offseason, but we did see it again last week. 34% of Louvu's snaps were on the edge. He rushed the passer 16 times, did not deliver a single pressure, by the way, on his 16 pass rush attempts, and ended up with just an 8.8% tackle rate. That is way below average. So he is just much more boom bust than we like for weekly leagues. The ceiling is certainly there. And if you want to aim for that ceiling, and put him in the lineup, you can, but know that his floor is typically much lower than your average full-time linebacker. Bobby Wagner, I think, should be solid. Definitely the preferred option here for IDP. But again, we'll see how this Washington defense reacts to Green Bay this week. On the defensive line for Washington, Packers are not an easy matchup. We talked about that last week with the Lions, and Aiden Hutchinson did not end up getting a sack. So I have less faith in the Washington D line to get home against Jordan Love, who didn't take a sack at all last week. Von Miller was only like third in the rotation as well, behind Dietrich Wise and Dorrance Armstrong. Daron Payne had a decent game, but I would like to see him be more consistent before trusting him again. Ideally, we'll be able to trust them in better matchups than this. And then Washington DBs, Quan Martin, Will Harris, I thought that was, a pretty good game for them. They were, the Packers were not necessarily a good matchup for safeties last week, but again, it's just 1 week. I liked the usage for Quan Martin and Will Harris. Both of those guys rotated down toward the line of scrimmage quite a bit. So I think they could both be fine starts this week in that kind of safety 2 range if you need them. On the Green Bay side of things, Micah Parsons, apparently an IDP gamer himself, which you love to see, obviously tunes into the podcast as well and subscribes to the channel and the IDP Fantasy Report, which you can too, just like Micah. Use code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off. Obviously, subscribe to the channel as well. I know a decent amount of you still not subscribed, so just take a second, hit the subscribe button. It's free, and I'll always do my best to help you guys every single week. So let's go back to IDP gamer Micah Parsons. He was limited in his first game with the team. He's been dealing with a back injury. He's obviously not been on the team for long, so just 45% of snaps last week. Yet he was still able to land a sack near the end of the game. I'm fully expecting his snaps to increase as the weeks go on. It's also a short week, which never helps, but still definitely expecting him to play more than 45% this week. I have him as a low-end edge one for this week. Jaden Daniels also wasn't great at avoiding sacks last week, but again, just one game, and it was against a very good New York Giants defensive line. Packers, the rest of their defensive line, pretty good themselves. Devontae Wyatt, Rashawn Gary, also strong options for deeper leagues. Wyatt, obviously more for DT required, but both guys looked great last week. And if Jaden Daniels does continue to struggle avoiding sacks, they'll have some value this week again, more in deeper formats. Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper, the linebackers, both linebackers were 100% snap players. We obviously love that. Micah Parsons had Edgerrin Cooper in his lineup and scored him 36 points. He's got some jacked up tackle scoring there. But yeah, we're still going to like Cooper probably over Quay Walker for now, just because he's been so much more effective to this point in his career. He'll be an LB1 for us this week. Quay probably more of an LB2, but both guys startable at 100% of snaps. And then their DBs for Green Bay. Nate Hobbs missed last game, which I think caused the shift at the defensive back position. We talked about it briefly last week about waiting to see with this group. And what we did see was that Javon Bullard actually took over the primary slot duties while also sharing time at safety with Evan Williams. So Evan Williams was not a full-time player. Neither was Bullard. So once again, I'm not really trusting these guys just yet. We'll stick with Xavier McKinney, and we'll see if Nate Hobbs gets back in the lineup and if that changes things once again there. Hopefully we'll see some more consistency once everybody's healthy. All right, moving on to New England and Miami now. Harold Landry, he was edge one for IDP last week. He was excellent. Look, not typically the most effective pass rusher, but he had a monster game in week 1, 2.5 sacks on 76% of snaps. Tua Tagovailoa is his matchup this week, as well as that Miami offensive line, which wasn't great. Tua had a 50% pressure to sack conversion rate in week 1. The Miami offense was trash. So Landry can absolutely have value for us again this week. Still more of an edge 2 for me because he's not actually like an elite pass rusher. So the sacks are typically harder to come by for him, but he plays a ton and he's not a scrub. So edge 2 it is. Defensive tackles, Milton Williams played a career high 78% of snaps, didn't have like an amazing IDP game, but the underlying metrics, the playing time definitely point to much better days. Same thing with Christian Barmore. Him being back was really encouraging to see, played 75% himself. So really like the interior options for this Patriots defensive line, but hopefully we start to see some production from them here as the weeks go on. At linebacker, it was Christian Ellis who actually led the team in tackles in week 1. But he did not play a full-time role. So Christian Ellis, more for tackle heavy leagues where he has that kind of DL eligibility, like on Sleeper, we can use him as a DL2 option. For the most part, though, because of his snap share being, less than 75%, he'll probably be an LB4 type for us in most formats. Robert Spillane was the 100% snap player. I know a lot of folks were pretty upset with his shitty output. Just a 6.3% tackle rate. That is brutal. But again, 100% snap player. Patriots were also the most man-heavy defense in the league in week 1, so that didn't help. But obviously, expecting better days ahead for Spillane. But it is important to note that defensive scheme change here. Remember, he was on the Raiders last year. The Raiders are super zone heavy. Last season, they were the most zone heavy team in the league in week 1. The Patriots were the polar opposite of that, right? So it's why this stuff kind of matters when you hear me talk about it all the time and stuff like that. But again, he'll be a usable IDP option for us since he's still playing 100% of snaps. He'll have his big games, I'm sure. And then at safety, both Jalen Hawkins and rookie Craig Woodson were 100% snap safeties for the Patriots this week. Both players delivered pretty strong IDP performances too. Woodson is the guy that I like a little bit more. His usage in the box, it was around 35%. That's going to push him into that kind of startable range more so than Jalen Hawkins. I know Hawkins had the big plays, right? But those aren't as sustainable either. But I do like Craig Woodson. I like Jalen Hawkins as well. But we'll see what this Miami offense does, man, because they were atrocious last week. And then Kyle Duggar, just not an option. He's droppable. If you've been holding on to him, I know there was maybe some hope after the team released Jabril Peppers that maybe they're back in on Duggar. Not the case. He could be safely dropped. New England cornerbacks, Marcus Jones is really the only one of interest here. I know a lot of people like him because he plays that snap role. He only played 64% of snaps last week as the team's primary nickel corner. It's important to note, the Raiders offense, it was below average in terms of 11 personnel. So that's why his snaps were down near that. Probably going to be the same snap share this week against Miami, who was also in that kind of 60% range of 11 personnel. That's what we see a lot with our nickel corners. You'll probably hear me reference that quite a bit as the weeks go on. Looking at these nickel corners when the offense isn't in 11 personnel, there's not always a need to keep these guys on the field. So they rotate different defensive personnel on there. So that's what hurts some of these guys. And Marcus Jones is one of them where he'll be a little bit more matchup dependent, hopefully seeing some more 11 personnel heavy offenses that keep him on the field more. In Miami, we got 2 full-time linebackers, which was nice to see. Jordan Brooks, Tyrell Dodson, both of these guys were awesome. Patriots gave up the 3rd most tackles last week, so that was nice to see. So maybe, these Miami linebackers can continue to rack up a ton. They were excellent in week 1. Both of those guys hit double-digit sacks, or tackles. So I'm good, trusting them here. More of the same this week. No concerns there. Where there are maybe a little bit more concerns is with the Dolphins' edge rotation. At least Bradley Chubb was able to land a sack, but all 4 of those guys, Chubb, Jalen Phillips, Chop Robinson, Matthew Judon, rotated pretty heavily. They all played less than 60% of snaps. Chubb and Jalen Phillips are probably still the ones to trust if you had to, against a softer New England offensive line as well. Chop Robinson, probably not a bad play this week in deeper leagues, but ideally you just have better options than these guys because it was a little concerning that the playing time wasn't there. If we start to see the same playing time, but consistently good pass rush metrics and production, then sure, we could start to trust them more, but it's a little bit shaky right now. Miami DBs, look, my mea culpa from last week. Somehow I mentioned Mike Hilton when talking Dolphins. He's not on the team. I'm an idiot. I don't know why I was thinking he still was. That's what happens when you, raw dog 90% of the show with no notes in week 1. But no, there's bound to be a slip up, right? But never again. Minkah Fitzpatrick is the only Miami defensive back I'm playing. He had good usage, played all over, only 48% deep in week 1. Ifeatu Melifonwu did not play a full-time role. He was rotated off the field on occasion for either Ashton Davis or Dante Trader. So he ended up with less than 70% of snaps. That's going to keep him out of starting consideration for IDP until he hits that 100% snap rate. Okay, Chicago and Detroit next. So Chicago, we saw the Monday Night Football. We knew that TJ Edwards was out for that game. So we got Penne's brother, Rigatoni, Noah Sewell. He filled in and played full time. He'll definitely be an option for us as long as TJ Edwards is out. We don't know for sure if TJ Edwards is going to miss this game, but if he does, you can definitely play Noah Sewell and feel pretty good about that. Both of the Chicago linebackers, I think, are playable. Tremaine Edmonds as well. Lions also gave up the second most tackles to the linebacker position last week, so that helps if we're going to trust that week 1 sample. Chicago defensive line, Deo Odeyingbo, pretty strong Bears debut in week 1. He's more of a deeper league streaming option than anything, but probably not this week against the Lions offensive line. Gervon Dexter, Montez Sweat, same kind of thing, more deeper league options right now. At safety, it was a relatively quiet week for Jaquan Brisker in week 1. It was good to see him back out there for sure. He played in the box about 30% of snaps. Lions didn't give up much to the safeties last week as far as tackles go, but I still like Jaquan Brisker quite a bit. I think he could still be a good option for us this season as long as he avoids the concussions. And then cornerback wise, Nahshon Wright, who, it was cool. Pick 6 and everything. Not expecting that again, but this was at least a good matchup for cornerbacks last week for the Lions. The only thing I think to keep in mind here, Kyler Gordon was out in week 1, will hopefully be back. If he is back, that might hurt Wright's snap share. It could hurt Tyreek Stevenson's snap share as well. We don't know exactly which one it'll be because we do expect Kyler Gordon to play both outside when not in the slot, which could push one of either of those guys to a less than 100% role. So Kyler Gordon, if he's back, I'd play him. I mean, if not, you could roll with Nahshon Wright again. Don't expect that same level of production, obviously, but it's not the worst matchup. And then for the Detroit Lions, so linebackers, Jack Campbell, as expected, green dot linebacker this season, played full-time next to Anzalone. Also, as expected, Campbell was significantly more effective with his opportunities compared to Anzalone. Again, they only played 48 defensive snaps. That is going to keep those numbers in check. That was second lowest, I think, for the entire week in week 1, right? Either way, Campbell, to me, he's a locked-in weekly IDP option for us going forward. I don't really have any concerns there. I know that, excuse me, Jesus. I know the Bears weren't a great matchup for linebackers in week 1, but again, it's a 1-week sample. We still trust this Lions linebacker core a fair bit, both guys playing 100%. Derek Barnes also mixed in there. He played quite a bit. The only thing was like 44% of his snaps came on the edge, so he's really just kind of a deep league option. Don't expect a lot of tackle efficiency from him. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean, the Minnesota linebackers against Chicago last week weren't great, but again, it's 1 week. And then, then Aiden Hutchinson is the other piece of this Lions defense. He looked healthy in his return. He played all but 2 defensive snaps in his first game back. Was whatever it was, 95% of snaps. That was massive. Didn't do much for IDP, but the Packers, we talked about it. They were a tougher pass rush matchup. It did end up mattering for Aiden Hutchinson. This week, though, he gets Caleb Williams, who was running for his life against the Vikings on Monday, which, to be fair, he did a decent job of that. But yeah, Hutch is a different beast, and playing him for 95% plus is all the indication I think we need to trust him going forward. The Minnesota offensive line, or whatever, not Minnesota, Chicago's offensive line is also the 9th best matchup from a pass blocking grade perspective. So should be a little bit easier for Aiden Hutchinson this week. And then Brian Branch, not concerned about a quieter game from him in week 1. You're still going to play him every single week. Jacksonville, Cincinnati. We'll start with the Jacksonville linebackers because Foye Oluokun did exactly what we expected of him all offseason. New defensive coordinator coming in. We got a great game from him. He was LB3 in scoring in week 1, played 100% of the snaps. And here's the best part. Anthony Campanelli played the 5th highest rate of zone coverage in week 1, which definitely helps, as we know. Unfortunately, no amount of zone coverage is going to help somebody like Devin Lloyd because he might be Deadvin Lloyd at this point, playing just 34% of the snaps, rotating with Ventrell Miller in what was a non-full-time LB2 spot between the two of them. Neither of those guys are worth trusting. We'll just stick with Foye going forward until we see something different. And the Bengals, they did end up giving up a decent amount of tackles to the Browns linebackers in week one. So Foye is a locked-in LB1 this week and probably going forward as well. Meanwhile, Josh Hines-Allen, don't panic here, right? It's one of the things I mentioned at the very top of the show, trusting the process. Obviously, he didn't have a great IDP performance, but 89.6 pass rush grade, 32.1% win rate, 25% pressure rate. Those are elite numbers for a player playing as much as he did, up over 70% of the snaps. We will buy that every single time. Now he gets that Bengals abysmal offensive line, and Joe Burrow, who had a 25% pressure to sack conversion rate last week. I'm expecting a much better week for Josh Hines-Allen in week two. Trayvon Walker should also be fine, though he's much more of a volume-dependent play because his underlying metrics just aren't anywhere near what Josh Hines-Allen puts up. And then Jacksonville DBs, we will not forget about Travis Hunter this time. He played just 6 defensive snaps in this game. 83% of snaps on offense. So Liam Cohen did come out after the game and said that he expects Hunter's role to grow. And that the lighter workload on defense specifically was a result of him just kind of missing time in training camp with the injury. So again, we're going to continue to lock him into that DB1 spot in our lineups because he's a full-time wide receiver. And then anything else that we get from him on the defensive side is going to be a bonus. I think he did get a tackle in week one, so that definitely helps. But ideally, the offensive production will be much better. Jacksonville didn't have to do much that last game, but I think they will be here against Cincinnati. Eric Murray also had a nice game, the Jaguars safety. Again, we're not overreacting to that week one, probably leaning toward Wingard if I had to pick one just because of the usage, but not an overly interesting safety group. Jordan Lewis, their cornerback, though, we talked about him in week one. He had a nice game. I think we could stick with him as a potential cornerback one option going forward, especially against a pass-heavy Bengals offense. I'll expect a better game from the Jacksonville cornerbacks than what we got from the Browns cornerbacks in week one versus Cincinnati. So Jordan Lewis tends to be one that I like quite a bit. Bengals side of things, Trey Hendrickson, look, picked up right where he left off, literally 90.2 pass rush grade, took advantage of that weak Browns offensive line, got himself a sack. This Jacksonville O-line was pretty good in week one. That is the only concern, but who did they face? They faced the damn Kardashian sisters over there in Carolina. So it's not surprised that those guys couldn't generate much being all ass. But yeah, Hendo, I think we should, he should really give them their first real test of the season. Decent first game from Shamar Stewart as well. 78.2 pass rush grade, 26% win rate, but just 49% of the snaps. So we're not trusting him just yet, but that was at least promising to see from Shamar Stewart. Again, it was against the Browns offensive line. So, Jaguars should be tougher. But still, Hendrickson locked into lineups. Cincinnati linebackers, Demetrius Knight Jr. was incredibly effective with his opportunities this past week, but it was not in a full-time role, right? He came off the field in obvious passing situations, which kept his snap share in check there around that just under 80% of snap range. He could still be a fine IDP option, but the thing is there's so many full-time linebackers to choose from. He's just kind of more of a deeper league option. I have him in that LB4 range right now. Logan Wilson's still the preferred option here. He'll be the full-time guy. He left that week one game for a little bit to get checked for injury, but otherwise was 100% of snaps. And then at safety, Jordan Battle. Talked about him a lot this offseason, really liked his breakout potential. He had a massive week one game, led the team in tackles, even came up down with an interception. The only thing is like his deployment, 21% in the box wasn't as good as I would have liked, but he was the only Cincinnati defensive back to play every single snap in this game, which was promising to see. And then Jacksonville too, it might not be the worst matchup. They gave up quite a bit to those Carolina safeties last week. So maybe we do get another great battle game and keep this breakout season rolling. But with that usage, typically going to be more in the safety 2 range for me. New York Giants, Dallas Cowboys. Let's start with the Giants defensive line versus the Cowboys offensive line, which might be a bloodbath. It was a bad week for that Cowboys offensive line unit last week against the Eagles. Even though Dak avoided taking a sack amazingly, like just a 40.8 pass block grade from that unit in week one. Now they face Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeau, Abdul Carter, and of course, sexy Dexter Lawrence. So expecting a pretty strong showing from this Giants defensive line. Burns is definitely an edge 1 option. Carter probably more of a deep league edge 3 option right now. Same thing with Thibodeau. Thibodeau did play the most of anyone on that defensive line in week 1, but man, he's still kind of frustrating, still just mid pass rush metrics. So really more of an edge 3, especially with the potential of Carter breathing down his neck for more snaps as well. Giants linebackers, we talked about it a lot in the final weeks before the season, kind of that concern about Bobby Okereke losing his full-time role. I cautioned it again heading into week 1, but unfortunately, what we might not know the real answer to whether that was going to happen or not, because Micah McFadden left in the first quarter, did not return. He'll likely be out for a while. So with no McFadden in the lineup, Bobby Okereke played 100% of snaps, racked up 16 total tackles. So Bobby O, as long as McFadden is out, should be a safe starting option for us once again. Darius Moasso can be a deeper league option, not expecting full-time snaps from him. And then defensive back wise, a lot of people were worried about Tyler Nubin's production in week 1. And yeah, the usage wasn't as ideal as I'd like to see every single week, but still a big believer in him. And again, it's important not to get too up or too down after just 1 week. No need to panic drop Nubin for like Eric Murray or anything like that. We'll roll with him again and let it play out for a couple weeks here before we really look to move on if we need to. But also Drew Phillips, cornerback there, should be in for a near full-time workload, playing primarily in the slot against an 11 personnel heavy Dallas offense. Here in week 2, Dallas was 4th in 11 personnel rate in week 1. Dallas side of things, their linebackers, my God, Kenneth Murray showing up to basically pull the rug out on Jack Sanborn's season was super frustrating, of course, especially with all signs out of camp pointing towards Sanborn and just Murray just being legitimately awful. But that's kind of the plot armor that these first round players are often afforded, even if they suck. So for now, we'll roll with Kenneth Murray. Jack Sanborn is just a deep league option only. He played 76% of snaps. I think he only played that much because they wanted to stop the Eagles' run game. He came off the field in pretty much all the third and medium or longer situations. So, then he wasn't even a full-time player on early downs, right? So IDP managers absolutely need to pivot to Kenneth Murray right now. He should be in a linebacker-friendly defense here, right? Zone-heavy defense deployed by Matt Eberflus, and that should help Murray, who has been typically inefficient as a tackler, but I don't think he should be any worse than like a weekly LB3 option for us as long as he's playing those full-time snaps. So for Jack Sanborn, if there are any full-time linebackers available to you on waivers, and that's basically 90% of snaps and above, you absolutely go and target them over Jack Sanborn right now. Again, I'll put the weekly IDP fantasy report, attach that in the comments here so you guys can go and check that out and see all the snap shares for every team, every linebacker, every player, and figure that out. But there's also waiver wires in there, waiver wire targets in there included. Dallas edge defenders, they rotated quite a bit. There's nobody that I really trust. It was against a pretty good Eagles offensive line, sure, but there's not really like a clear option because it was such a heavy rotation. Sam Williams, I believe, played the most. Decent game from him. If you want to start him, you can, but ideally you have some better options on your defensive line. And then Deron Bland for corners. He worked as the team's primary slot defender this week. It was the first time that he really did so since his rookie year. So that was good to see. I think he could be an IDP relevant option for us compared to when he was locked to that outside role. Obviously, he had the year with the pick sixes. We're not expecting that again. I'm talking tackle wise. Deron Bland should be in a decent spot. And then their safeties, I'm not as interested. They're Donovan Wilson, Malik Hooker. Moving over to Cleveland and Baltimore now. So Myles Garrett, obviously showing us why he's a locked-in IDP starter and should never leave lineups. Multiple sacks again. Look, the ceiling, we talk about it all the time. It's better than pretty much every player at the position, right? So even if he has a quiet week or two, we never take him out of lineups because that ceiling is massive for Myles Garrett. Mason Graham as well, really interesting, played a pretty decent role in week 1. It didn't translate to IDP production, but like to see him playing near 80% of the defensive snaps. That's the 5th overall pick from this year's draft. Mason Graham, defensive tackle there, could be an option in DT required formats. Carson Schlesinger, so linebacker wise, he was the lone full-time linebacker for the Browns, as we expected. He's likely going to be the only one worth trusting for IDP going forward. Devin Bush was fine. He played around 70%, but really just kind of a deep league option as that LB2 there in Cleveland. Amazingly, this Ravens offense allowed the second fewest tackles to the linebacker position in week one. I don't know if it was that Bernard and Milano were just inefficient AF or just the way the ball went, but I really thought there'd be more linebacker friendly opportunities for teams playing against the Ravens. Not totally convinced that there won't be. So absolutely still trusting Schlesinger here in week 2. And then on the Ravens side of things, look, Roquan Smith continues to be a locked in LB1 for us. The Browns were a linebacker friendly offense in week 1, so that's promising for Roquan. Unfortunately, we can't trust any other linebacker in Baltimore to be able to take advantage of that. Trenton Simpson played 31% of snaps. Teddy Buchanan played 34%. So both players unusable for IDP right now until one of them, which I think is likely going to be Buchanan, eventually emerges with a larger role, but we're not trusting them in week 2. Kyle Hamilton was safety 1 coming out of week 1. Zero concern about him. So yeah, absolutely still locked into lineups. And the Browns gave up the most tackles to safeties in week 1. So no reason for him to leave your lineups. Malachi Starks also a solid option after a nice week 1 game, especially again in positive matchups here, but Hamilton still very clearly the top option. Baltimore defensive line, it's a decent pass rush matchup here against the Browns. I just don't know that I trust any of the Ravens pass rushers. Kyle Van Noy is probably the most trustworthy of the bunch. He played the most. We know he can sack the quarterback, even though he's not a great pass rusher. If you have to play somebody, then it's Kyle Van Noy. Odafe Owe only played 45% of snaps, not trusting him, and still just waiting on Mike Green, who played 31% of snaps in his first game in the NFL. Nnamdi Madubuike and Travis Jones, actually decent options for DT required leagues. Travis Jones actually led the defensive lineman in snap share in week 1 at 74%. So that was promising. Could be some good production for them against the Browns offensive line. On to the Los Angeles Rams and the Tennessee Titans next. Let's start with the Rams defensive line, because last week I loved the matchup for Jared Verse and Kobe Turner. Well, they didn't get home. Instead, it was Byron Young and Tyler freaking Davis who got the sacks. But that doesn't mean that we're not going to double down on Verse and Turner. Hell, throw Byron Young and Braden Fisk in there as well, because I love this matchup against the Tennessee Titans. Jared Verse is going up against left tackle Dan Moore Jr., who rocked a 26.4 pass blocking grade in week 1. That ranks 64th out of 65 qualifying offensive tackles. Then on the other side, you got Byron Young. He gets JC Latham. Latham ranked 59th out of 65 qualifying offensive tackles with a 41.3 pass blocking grade. Kobe Turner gets the interior offensive line, which includes center Lloyd Cushenberry, who had a 38.8 pass blocking grade, which ranked 28 out of 32 qualifying centers. And that's not to mention Cam Ward, who had a 33.3% pressure to sack conversion rate. We need it this week. We should get it this week. Big time matchup to take advantage of here. Of course, it's easier said than done, right? These numbers can line up perfectly, but players can get unlucky. But Jared Verse is absolutely locked into my lineups this week. All the usage or the snap share was up near 90%. All those underlying pass rush metrics are still there for him. It doesn't matter that he didn't get a sack last week. He looked great as usual. So did Byron Young. So we're trusting the process here. As far as Los Angeles Rams linebackers, Nate Landman, the only one I'm trusting. The Titans offense was rough in week 1. They gave up the fewest tackles to the linebacker position because they just had a hard time doing anything. So not going to trust a non-full-time linebacker in this game. I'll just go with Nate Landman. And then the safeties, Cameron Curl and Quentin Lake. Curl played 30% in the box, great tackle game. And Quentin Lake, 76% of his snaps in the slot. Not as good of a game, but both of these guys, the usage is there. We can absolutely trust them. Cam Curl, we'll see. We knew that he had this role last year and he was really inefficient. So I am waiting to see if he could be a little bit more consistent for us, but I do like what we got in week 1. So I'm fine putting him into lineups if you have to. And then on the Tennessee side of things, their linebacker is pretty straightforward. Cody Barton is the clear full-time linebacker, and Cedric Gray, a fine option as well. He worked as the clear LB2 option next to Barton, played 82% of snaps, and there was no sign of James Williams on defense. He only played on special teams. So Cedric Gray looks pretty safe in that LB2 role. It's just not a full-time role. It would be around 75 to 80% of snaps. Tennessee's defensive line, Jeffrey Simmons locked into lineups, no question there. And the Rams were the worst pass blocking unit in the league in week 1. So there's some advantage to take to have there for Jeffrey Simmons. The rest of the group, though, I mean, it was interesting that the rookie second round pick Oluwafemi Oladejo played the second most snaps at the edge position for this group. It was promising, I guess, but he just didn't show much in terms of pass rush metrics or IDP production. Just a name worth monitoring, I guess, more for dynasty leagues than anything. And then defensive back-wise for Tennessee, L'Jarius Sneed, he's been a IDP relevant corner for us before, but he was on a pitch count in week 1, so not sure I want to trust anyone for the Titans cornerbacks if L'Jarius Sneed continues to be eased back into action. Next game is the San Francisco 49ers and the New Orleans Saints. So we'll start with Nick Bosa. A great start, obviously. The big strip sack there, fumble recovery right near the end of the game. Also, still a really strong tackler. He's been great and draws a really nice matchup here. I mean, look, I don't need to tell you to start Nick Bosa. He played 75% of the snaps or higher, I think it was. And he's just been excellent. So the other name, I guess, to consider is Michael Williams. So interesting as a first round rookie because he did play 75% of the snaps. However, 0% win rate, 0% pressure rate, 49.2 pass rush grade. I think we'll wait until we see it from him. We had concerns about him coming out and being effective at the next level right away. It's good that they're playing him a ton. He gets a softer matchup this week, so that could help, but I'd still rather see it. And then linebacker-wise, Fred Warner, he left week 1 just very briefly. I think it was 3 snaps to get checked for injury. But we did get some information there because with Warner out, he was replaced by Tatum Bethune, who played that Fred Warner role. So if Fred Warner does get an injury, we know Tatum Bethune is the name to keep in mind there for waiver wires. But other than that, Sweet D Winters played every single snap next to Fred Warner. He's going to be a season-long IDP option for us with that usage as well. Defensive back. So this was interesting. Rookie Marquise Siegel. He kind of a surprise, emerged as the full-time starting safety here for the 49ers in week 1. He had 6 total tackles and a fumble recovery. But more importantly, he played every single snap and 60% of his snaps in the box. So he is one of the top IDP targets for me on the waiver wire. And then Jason Pinnock also could be an option because he got the same usage, also 60% in the snap in the box somehow. But Saints also in week 1, they gave up the second most tackles to safeties. So these guys might cook this week. I kind of like them as some deeper plays. New Orleans, they're off their defense. I guess we'll start with their D-line. Carl Granderson, off-season listeners of this podcast know that we were in on the Carl Granderson train. Started off really nicely here in week 1, 1.5 sacks. He's also one of the better tacklers at the position, very similar to Alex Highsmith, who comes with like a strong floor, big play upside, really underrated IDP asset. So I do like that about Carl Granderson. It's not the greatest matchup. I have Brock Purdy's pressure to sack conversion rate up there on the screen right now. It's not a guarantee that he plays. If he doesn't, then Mac Jones would be in and feel better about the matchup. But yeah, Carl Granderson, really the one that I trust the most. Chase Young was out for this past week's game. Cameron Jordan played a larger role because of that. He had a 1.5 sack game. He actually has DT eligibility on MFL. So if Chase Young is out again, Cameron Jordan might be a decent option if in DT required leagues, but only if Chase Young is out. New Orleans linebacker. So this was, I thought, a really positive shift for this linebacker core because Demario Davis played 100. He obviously played 100% of snap. That's typical of him, but he was actually really efficient in this game. Again, longtime listeners of this podcast will know he's been one of the most inefficient tacklers at the position. So maybe a shift here. Again, it's just one game, but more importantly, Pete Werner as well played 91% of snaps, and he too was super efficient. And the big reason for this shift, I think, anyways, Brandon Staley coming in as the defensive coordinator, we did get a much more zone heavy deployment from this Saints defense. So this was something that we talked about in the IDP bounce back episode with the great dynasty trip. And he highlighted Pete Werner on that episode for this very reason. And again, it's just one game, but we're off to a nice start here as they move away from that Superman heavy defense that they've been stuck in previous years. So we'll see if that trend continues, but both of those guys, Demario Davis, Pete Werner, should be usable in non-shallow formats. And Julian Blackmon did suffer a torn labrum, unfortunately. He's going to be out for a long period of time. So if with Blackmon out, it could be rookie Jonas Sanker, should be the next man up. Worth a shot in IDP leagues. He was somebody that really liked coming out of the draft because he played a lot near the line of scrimmage. So if he gets that opportunity in the NFL, I think he could be really effective. Don't need to plug him into lineups this week. We'll wait and see what the usage is and playing time and everything, but he's the name to keep in mind here with Julian Blackmon out. Seattle and Pittsburgh is up next. We'll start with the Seattle defensive line. We mentioned it in the IDP report, but both Boye Mafe at 74% and DeMarcus Lawrence at 68% played pretty decent snap shares, but I did mention that it's worth monitoring what this looks like once Uchenna and Nwosu gets back in the lineup. We do expect maybe a little bit more rotation amongst this group. But Leonard Williams can continue to play him. No concerns there. Byron Murphy, the second-year defensive tackle, got a nice snap increase in his first game of year two. He played a career high 76% of snaps. He's a player that I'm hopeful for in Dynasty, so really like him, and that was great to see, but not necessarily like a must start or anything just yet, but it was worth a note there. And Aaron Rodgers, look, he's gonna be the quarterback for the Steelers. He's gonna be the target for these pass rushers. He had a pretty poor 44.4% pressure to sack conversion rate in week one, so there is some to take advantage of there. Seattle linebackers, Ernest Jones locked in, obviously really nice week one performance from him with 8 tackles and a pick. Tyrese Knight remains, I think, a deep league option, not a full-time player. Again, he's going to be fine for us. The safeties for Seattle absolutely are going to be crucial here. Julian Love locked into lineups every single week, so you don't need to hear that after the game that he had in week one. Kobe Bryant is also fine. It doesn't seem like Nick Emenwari will be available after getting hurt. That also meant that Witherspoon's snap share or slot snap share was kind of unaffected, right? Since Emenwari got hurt in the first quarter of week one. So Witherspoon should continue to see a lot of slot snaps for as long as Emenwari is out, which obviously we love for IDP. And then on Pittsburgh, Alex Highsmith, man, he was excellent in week one. He doesn't need to leave our lineup. Same with TJ Watt. Cam Hayward, he wasn't very effective, but he also missed some time in camp with this like contract weirdness. So not sure what's going on there, but fine as kind of a low end DT1 considering what we know he's capable of and accomplished last season. Pittsburgh linebackers, Patrick Queen, fine to trust him in what should be a good matchup. But more importantly, I think Peyton Wilson played a career high 88% of defensive snaps after his highest snap share so far in the NFL coming into this game was only 58%. Now, Malik Harrison did land on IR, so there was an injury there. Cole Holcomb didn't play. So, it was just an interesting change there. But again, it'll continue to be one that we monitor, but I think Peyton Wilson is at least a deep league option for us with that snap share. And then another injury, freaking Deshaun Elliott left this game due to a knee injury late in the second quarter. He did not return. This sucks because I loved Elliott heading into the year, and he was off to an amazing start in the first half of that game with 6 total tackles. Sounds like he'll be out for a while. Chuck Clark filled in for Elliott after he got hurt, but he only played 28% of his snaps in the box, so it was a little bit of a different deployment there. They also brought in Jabril Peppers, so we'll see what the plan is there. I might just avoid the Steelers safeties in week 2, especially considering Seattle ranked 27th in tackles allowed to the position in week 1. Buffalo and the New York Jets is up next, so let's start with the Buffalo linebackers because holy hell, this linebacker core pissed me off on Sunday night. They were ghosts out there against the Ravens, which feels hard to do against that offense. So hopefully we get better games from Bernard specifically, but also Milano. He played 88% of snaps, right? So again, we're going to give them another chance here where we need them. But yeah, it wasn't a great showing from them in week one. On the defensive line, Joey Bosa, he should get a lot of Olu Fashanu in week two. Fashanu wasn't great last year, and then a 43.7 pass blocking grade in week one. So should be a positive matchup for Joey Bosa if you want a streaming option. On the other side of the Jets offensive line, their first round pick from this year, Armand Membu, he was great in week one, and he was against TJ Watt, mind you. He had a 78.6 pass blocking grade, didn't allow a single pressure against TJ Watt. So he'll be a fun one to monitor kind of going forward. Greg Rousseau is going to draw him this week, might actually have a harder matchup than expected for Rousseau. So we'll see if it was a fluke or not from Membu, but tempering expectations for Greg. Ed Oliver put together a really dominant IDP performance for defensive tackle leagues. 6 total tackles that include a sack, a forced fumble, 3 tackles for loss. Played a solid snap share. I continue to be a startable IDP option for us in DT required leagues. Safety wise for the Bills, Taylor Rapp and Cole Bishop both played full-time roles in week one. Jordan Poyer was inactive in week one. So it is a decent matchup here based on like the 1 game sample again. But again, keeping an eye on Jordan Poyer is all. On the Jets side of things, their defensive line, Jermaine Johnson played a pretty good workload here in his first game back from a torn Achilles last September. Didn't have a great IDP performance like Will McDonald did this week, but again, it was around 90% of snaps. So if he continues with that workload, it's going to lead to better games more often than not for Jermaine Johnson. Will McDonald's also a fine option here. The Bills and Josh Allen are a little bit of a tougher matchup. So tempering for this Jets defensive line. Even Quinnen Williams off to a great start after a disappointing season last year. The snap share, the underlying metrics continue to be there for Quinnen Williams. He's still a DT1 option for me in DT required leagues this week and this season. And then the Jets, man, their linebackers, they were much more man heavy than expected in week one. So that really kind of affected things. I think they ranked top 5 in man coverage rate in week one. So we didn't get the most efficient tackling performances from Quincy Williams and Jamien Sherwood. Yes, Quincy had, was it the sack, but we're not banking on that every week. He's still been super inefficient as a tackler. That included week one, 8.9% tackle rate. That's bad for a full-time off-ball linebacker. Jamien Sherwood was at least an average tackle rate. I think he'll ultimately be perfectly fine as a starter for us, though I didn't think they'd be so man-heavy under Steve Wilks, considering Wilks' history, but we'll see. People change, right? And maybe Wilks has as well. And then safety-wise, Tony Adams, Andre Sisco, as we kind of alluded to last week, so far there's just not a whole lot to be excited about there. I want to let you guys know that this PFF betting segment is brought to you by DraftKings. And again, credit to, we talked about this on the Waiver Wire show, credit to our PFF betting wizard, the great Mason Cameron, who has brought us the Garrett Wilson anytime touchdown at plus 205 versus the Buffalo Bills. Garrett Wilson, 87.7 receiving grade in week one. That was second among wide receivers. He had a 33-yard touchdown. He's going to face the Buffalo Bills coverage unit, which ranked 29th out of 30 teams before Monday Night Football with a 42.1 coverage grade. They allowed 26.1% of their passes to go for 15 plus yards. That was the most in week one. They also allowed the 10th highest open target rate in week one. So again, we're betting on the Justin Fields, Garrett Wilson connection here. Buffalo also ran a ton of cover one. Garrett Wilson destroyed the Steelers cover one in week one. He had an 89.1 receiving grade against man. This is going to be, I think, a connection that we can bet on this season, but specifically for this week, it looks good for Garrett Wilson, an anytime touchdown at plus 205. Lines and odds are subject to change. Also from DraftKings, don't let one bad leg haunt your parlay. Parlays turn into payouts, and now even near misses won't haunt your bet. The NFL season is here, and DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL, is rewriting the rules with Ghost Leg, a new game-changing promotion that turns close calls into cold, hard cash. Best of all, it's available to all DraftKings customers. Here's how it works. Build any 3+ leg parlay, pregame NFL parlay on Sunday, apply your ghost leg token, and if one leg loses, DraftKings makes it vanish like it never existed, and it pays you out in cash for the rest. Last season, over 30 million parlays were lost by a single leg. This year, Ghost Leg gives you those busted bets for a second life. I also had, it was a 5-leg parlay this weekend. It did not hit because Jared Verse didn't get a sack, but we had the ghost leg token and boom, it ended up being a nice plus 2,000 parlay, even though it could have been plus 3,200. So no more busted parlays that haunt you all season. With ghost leg, the bad leg vanishes, the payout doesn't. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app, use code PFF, that's code PFF, to unlock ghost leg, the promotion that makes one bad leg disappear and pays you out in real cash. Ghost your losses, get your payout in partnership with DraftKings Sportsbook. The crown is yours. Gambling problem, call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly on behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort, Kansas. Fees may apply in Illinois. 21 plus age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Opt for single-use token. Minimum 3+ legs and minus 500 odds per leg. Max bet varies. If only one leg of the bet loses, bet will settle as if only the winning legs were placed and pays out in cash based on odds when the bet was placed. See terms at sportsbook.draftkings.com/promos. Carolina versus Arizona is up next here. Let's start with the Carolina linebackers. So Christian Roseboom should be a solid linebacker option for us this week. He should be all year. Arizona, they were at least tackle friendly to the linebacker position last week. They were about 7th. And then Trevin Wallace, also a fine option in deeper leagues. They're still not trusting him full time. So he's like LB 50 for me this week based on playing time more than anything. But 86% of snaps isn't nearly as bad as what we got from some of the other team LB2s in week 1, which we'll talk about in just a sec with the Cardinals. Carolina defensive backs, Trayvon Merrick. I got him as DB8 this week. He played a very high 61% of his defensive snaps in the box. Probably won't be as high as that on a consistent basis, but it was very encouraging that he was far and away the team's option to rotate down toward the line of scrimmage. Nick Scott played just 3% of his snaps in the box. So they are very clearly telling us which one to trust for IDP. Merrick should absolutely be treated as a DB1 option going forward if this usage is anywhere near what it was in week 1 on a consistent basis. And then defensive line-wise for Carolina, it's Derek Brown. If you really need someone, DJ Wonnum, he does play enough that he can be fine, but not really trusting the group. Kyler Murray, he was at least awful at avoiding sacks in week 1, so that can help if you need the streaming option, but really just Derek Brown for DT required leagues. Okay, on to Arizona. The linebackers, it's just Mac Wilson. He was the only full-time player. We can definitely trust him. Akeem Davis-Gaither was on the field for just 37% of snaps in week 1. There's no way we should be trusting him in week 2. The team actually deployed a lot more 3 safety looks this week or last week. We'll see if that continues or not. But look, based on the data that we kind of have to trust, that's what they want to do. So they got Dadrion Taylor-Demerson out there for about 2/3 of the snaps. They're clearly showing us that they want to be a 1 linebacker defense. And for now, that 1 linebacker is Mac Wilson. So that is who we trust. Defensive back-wise, we're not putting Dadrion Taylor-Demerson in lineups just yet. 67% of snaps is not enough to make him a trustworthy IDP. Budda Baker absolutely stays in lineups. Also, Carolina, they were at least a positive matchup for safeties last week. So hopefully they can keep that going. Jalen Thompson is also an option in deeper leagues. I also like Garrett Williams a fair bit. He played 100% last week, staying on the field when the defense didn't call for him to play on the slot. So that was promising to see for Garrett Williams. He mostly played in the slot, and Carolina is one of the more 11 personnel heavy offenses in the league. So should be a decent opportunity there for him this week. Arizona defensive line, disappointing game from Josh Sweat in week 1, but he did play the most on that defensive line. The Carolina offensive line was surprisingly the 5th worst pass blocking unit in week 1. So maybe there's some hope there for Josh Sweat and or Baron Browning this week. I got Josh Sweat as more like edge 28 type range. Denver and Indianapolis is up next. So we'll start with the Denver linebackers because Dre Greenlaw, he missed last week, which was unfortunate because it meant that we got Justin Sternad, who isn't likely to be like a 1-for-1 replacement of Greenlaw in terms of playing time. He played just 67% of snaps in week 1. Greenlaw, we expect to be a 100% snap player. So hopefully he's back this week. But also Kingleton only performed like Singleton in week 1 with a brutal 7% tackle rate. I can't imagine that his efficiency will remain that low. That being said, the Broncos were the second most man-heavy defense in the league in week 1. So that's concerning for the Denver linebacker tackle rates overall. But again, it's just 1 week, so I think we can still see the return of the Kingleton in terms of efficiency, but definitely one to keep an eye on. He's a full-time player as well, and can be trusted this week. Safety-wise or defensive back-wise, Talanoa Hufanga was awesome in his first game with the team. I know people were disappointed with Brandon Jones, but both of these guys really had very similar usage, so I'd imagine that they'll likely alternate weeks as far as like the top-performing IDP safety on the team. Look, if Danny Dimes can get the Colts offense going like he did in week 1, then there should be a lot more opportunity for both safeties, right? But that being said, the Denver offense is Denver defense, is much better than, than the Miami defense looked in week 1. So not expecting things to go that smoothly for the Indianapolis offense in week 2. We'll see. And then we'll continue to wait on the nickel corner role here between Jahdae Barron and Jaquan McMillian. They both shared the nickel corner role in week 1, which will basically keep both players from being trustworthy IDP options for us in CB required leagues until one takes over that role, likely Barron. Denver defensive line, Zach Allen absolutely should stay in lineups. Nick Bonito looked great in week 1, 91.6 pass rush grade, 43% win rate, 29% pressure rate. More of that, please. That being said, the Colts offensive line was the best pass blocking unit in the league in week 1. But again, Miami was god awful. So let's wait a minute before crowning this Colts team at all, really. All right, let's go to those Colts now. And Zaire Franklin, super quiet in week 1, but he played 100% of snaps before garbage time. So he just didn't have to play much in this game. They already had one of the lowest defensive snap totals for last week. Actually, it was the lowest, if I remember correctly. Again, Miami's offense sucks. And then he only had to play 81% of those 47 snaps. So there will absolutely be better days ahead for Zaire Franklin. His tackle efficiency was spot on with league average for the position. It was purely just a playing time thing. Meanwhile, Joe Bachie was not a full-time linebacker too. Next to Zaire Franklin, he played just 59% of the snaps prior to garbage time. He was rotating with Cameron McGrone. I talked about waiting on that LB2 spot in Indianapolis until after week 1 in case there was some kind of shenanigans there. Of course there was, but now we know to truly stay away from them. Hopefully when Jalen Carles is back, we don't have to worry. But for now, only Zaire Franklin is usable for IDP. Defensive line-wise, DeForest Buckner stays in lineups, especially in DT required leagues. Laiatu Latu is the best option among the Colts edge defenders. He led the team in snap share in week 1. But again, just 47 defensive snaps. So that limited his opportunities. I was worried a little bit because Miami's offense could not sustain a single drive, but then he came up with that interception and I was literally levitating. So we can continue to utilize him, though it's a tougher matchup this week for pass rushers. So I have him more in that kind of high-end edge 3 range this week. Colts DBs, Kenny Moore continues to be an elite cornerback option for IDP. Nick Cross, the usage was great, 32% in the box, still racking up tackles at a high rate. Got him a safety 6 this week. Cameron Bynum, more of a safety 3 type. He had the interception last week, which really helped, but played 84% of his snaps deep, which is a major concern for his tackle ability. So don't chase the big plays with him. We should have better options available to us. Going on to Philadelphia and Kansas City next. So let's start with the Philadelphia defensive line because hopefully Jalen Carter can actually play a single snap before hawking a loogie at someone on the other team. I'd really appreciate that because I have high hopes for that guy in IDP, an elite player at the position when he's on the field. So he at least avoided suspension, most likely because Dak shot first. But damn, dude, let's hope we can avoid that nonsense going forward. Otherwise, Moro Ojimo and Jordan Davis are going to be playing a ton again. Also, those two, I am still just kind of waiting to see what their snap shares look like with Carter in the lineup, but both are good players, could have value in DT required leagues. But other than Jalen Carter in DT required, Nolan Smith is the next best option. He led the Eagles edge rotation with an 85% snap share, 77.4 pass rush grade was pretty solid. He'll face Jawan Taylor for the most part at right tackle. He was a solid pass blocker last week. Mahomes typically good at avoiding sacks. So Nolan Smith, more of a kind of a low-end edge 2 this week, but I was really encouraged by his week 1 game. Linebacker wise for Philadelphia, quiet game from this group in week one, but Zach Bond, he's going to be perfectly fine. I'm leaving him as an LB1 for now. Also, Jihad Campbell played 92% of the snaps, came off the field on a couple goal line plays, a few third down snaps when Dallas was in 2-minute drill. He also played 21% of his snaps on the edge, as we kind of warned about last week, right? So that could keep his tackle efficiency on the lower end. For now, Jihad Campbell's like an LB4 for me in redraft, but dynasty manager should be very excited because he looked great in week one. So hopefully that keeps going. Defensive back-wise, Reed Blankenship is the Eagles' lone IDP safety option right now. Andrew Makuba and did cede some snaps to Sidney Brown, so it wasn't a true full-time role for the rookie. So until Makuba becomes a full-time player, he's not going to be a starting IDP option for us. There's just too many full-time defensive backs that we can go to instead. But Cooper DeJean, his usage was great. He played primarily in the slot, but also never left the field. He played 100% of snaps for the first time in his NFL career. Really like that usage for DeJean as far as like projecting forward. And Kansas City should be a good matchup for him. So he'll stay in that CB1 territory. Kansas City's defensive line, pretty simple. George Karlaftis, he played a lot of snaps. That's his main thing. And it was a good matchup last week. That helped him land a sack. He's typically not the best, as far as underlying pass rush metrics go, but he can be a fine matchup dependent, volume heavy option for IDP. This week, I got him as like edge 32. The Eagles are not one of those matchups more often than not. So yeah, just more of an edge 3 this week. Chris Jones, fine with him. I got him as DT 6 this week. Kansas City's linebackers, Nick Bolton, a solid option again this week. Nice matchup here against the Eagles, who were very linebacker tackle friendly in week one, third most tackles to the linebacker position. I think I have Nick Bolton as LB 13 this week. Drew Tranquil, I have as like an LB 3 to 4 option. He's in that range of like solid team LB2s who are close to a full-time role, but not quite. That's the name of the tier that I'm going to put them in here. He did leave the game last week for like a short stint to get checked for injury, but that pushed his snap share down to 83%. But he was on pace for about 95% of snaps prior to that injury. So that was pretty encouraging for him. He did return to that game, and he even landed 2 sacks in that game. So that's probably his peak production for the year in a revenge game against his former team, the Chargers, last week. But I think he's still a fine option in like those non-shallow formats going forward. As far as safeties go, though, Chamari Connor, we talked about him a lot. He's going to continue to be the defensive back to roster for IDP in Kansas City. Really strong snap share in the box and the slot. Only 17% of his snaps deep. We love that. He led the team in tackles as a result. So he'll be that fringe safety one every single week. That's about the range where I got him. I think I actually have him. I want to say safety 6 this week. Safety 9. Okay, so safety 9. I got him at safety 9 this week. He's locked into most starting lineups if you got him. So definitely an option. Jaden Hicks, meanwhile, if you were hoping that it was going to be him, he is droppable. There's just too many safeties and defensive backs playing 100% of snaps. So not worth holding a guy who isn't going to play full-time snaps. Let's go to Sunday Night Football now. We'll start with it's Atlanta versus Minnesota. So we'll start with the Atlanta Falcons linebackers. I know folks were pissed about Caden Ellis in week one, but again, guys, it's 1 week, right? He was still 100% snap linebacker. The Falcons are a zone heavy defense. They played below average total snaps on defense in week one. So Caden Ellis will be just fine. Divine Diablo as well played a full-time role. I expect better days from him going forward as well in that role. So both of these guys really can be started safely if you need them. On the defensive line, we're basically just playing the waiting game here for either Jalen Walker or James Pierce Jr. to emerge as starters. Both of them played less than half of the snaps, so not ideal. Pierce did look good, 70 pass rush grade, 20% win rate, 27% pressure rate. It's just the 40% snap share that is no bueno, right? So also worth noting that Jalen Walker played all of his defensive line, all of his snaps on the defensive line. So that hybrid role that we talked about a ton coming out of college and around the NFL draft time is non-existent as of now. And they're kind of doing what we talked about as the optimal path for him in year one and just letting him play edge because he's much better there and still just way too raw as an off-ball linebacker. But either way, we're not trusting either of the Atlanta rookie defensive linemen until those snap shares increase quite a bit. Defensive back-wise for Atlanta, Xavier Watts and Jesse Bates are startable. Both of them played a decent amount in the box in week one. So I think we should get some good production from them again this year. The other option is Billy Bowman Jr., who took over as the Falcons' primary nickel defender this season. Pretty strong game from him in week one. He landed a half sack along with 6 total tackles. However, it is worth noting that Billy Bowman, he played, I think it was around 81% of snaps, which again, it's not a non-full-time role, pretty common for nickel defenders. We talked about that earlier. So his snap share, I think it could be up and down depending on the matchup, right? They played Tampa Bay last week. Tampa Bay, typically a team that plays a high rate of 11 personnel, 3 wide receivers, that is. So it calls for more of that slot usage for the defensive backs. And that made Tampa Bay one of the better matchups and led to probably Bowman's higher snap share in that 81% range. They're facing Minnesota this week. Minnesota's much closer to average in terms of 11 personnel. So I don't necessarily love the projection for Bowman this week. I think he'll be more matchup dependent for us this season. And this week isn't really one of those weeks for me. So Minnesota also allowed the second fewest tackles to cornerbacks last week. So keeping that in mind as well. On the Minnesota side of things, freaking Blake Cashman is injured. Who could imagine? Oh my God. This guy, Blake Glassman, it's so frustrating because I really like him as an IDP. Just, of course, he couldn't even get through one game before having a hamstring injury. So that's frustrating, but we persevere. We move on. We insulate our team with other options who could potentially fill in. And Eric Wilson is the guy who replaced him in an every down role in Brian Flores' defense. It was not Ivan Pace, as many people would have assumed, right? It's very important that IDP managers make the pivot to Wilson this week and not Ivan Pace. Ivan Pace was still not likely to play a full-time role this week. He didn't last week. He didn't play a single third or fourth down in week one, which says kind of a lot about what the team thinks of him at this point. The Vikings are also another kind of zone heavy defense, which it can be beneficial to Wilson, who's going to be filling in as that every down linebacker and to getting an above average tackle rate for as long as Blake Cashman is out. And it does sound like it'll be several weeks. So make sure Eric Wilson is somebody that you can grab off waivers right now and plug into lineups. Minnesota safeties, I think, part of the reason that Ivan Pace even played as much as he did in week one at 70% was not just the Cashman injury, but also because Harrison Smith was out. So they had to play Jay Ward as their third safety instead of Theo Jackson because Theo Jackson had to move up a spot on the depth chart. So if Harrison Smith is back this week, then I'd imagine Theo Jackson is the safety 3. And he plays much more than what we saw from Jay Ward at 37% of snaps in week one. That's also ultimately going to hurt Ivan Pace more than anyone else, unfortunately, right? So again, make sure you pivot to Eric Wilson there. I'd also expect Josh Metellus' box usage to increase if Harrison Smith is back. He only played 16% of his snaps in the box in week one, but again, likely due to the changes they had to make with all the personnel there in that back 7. So hopefully you guys understood what I'm talking about there. I'm realizing that I'm rambling here as I'm trying to work through it myself, but that is kind of the result that I came to. Okay. Minnesota defensive line. I mostly want to highlight Andrew Van Ginkel here because he's a solid IDP option for us. I just, again, don't think his edge 1 production from last year is super sustainable. Again, considering the usage and just the player as a whole, right? Week 1 kind of confirmed that for me, although he almost had a pick 6, so that was scary. But for me, a big part of his regression this year comes from just average to below average pass rush metrics. That was the case again in week 1, 53.3 pass rush grade, but also that he isn't rushing the passer nearly as much as like your typical edge rushers, right? So that lowers his sack potential even more when you pair that with the poor underlying pass rush metrics. He dropped into coverage exactly half of his 42 passing down snaps. So that's good for his tackle numbers, but it's bad for his sack totals, right? So he's really kind of a low-end edge 2 for me at best with that kind of usage. I got him as edge 21 this week. So it's fine. But again, we're not expecting edge 1 numbers again. Jonathan Grenard, I have his edge 16, a better pass rusher, going to spend more time there. The only thing is the matchup this week, Atlanta and Michael Penix specifically, who has been pretty good at avoiding sacks, and that offensive line is pretty solid. Next up is Monday Night Football game number 1 this week. We got back-to-back Monday Night Football games. First one is Tampa Bay versus Houston. So Tampa Bay linebackers, both Levante David and Servassier Dennis are playable going forward. Dennis played 95% of the snaps, so that was really good. There was a drive where he rotated off for Deion Jones, but that was it. And it doesn't appear to be a season-long concern, barring like a benching or something like that. So like Servassier Dennis, like Levante David as startable options for us. Hassan Reddick looked pretty good in his first game with the Bucs. He played a team leading 79% of snaps at his position. Really solid pass rush outing. He landed a sack as well. Also promising to see. I think a solid edge 2 option kind of going forward. I got him as edge 22 this week. Yaya Diaby, I got his edge 30. So again, it's not the best matchup. After Houston's offensive line was, I would say, better than expected in week 1. But again, CJ Stroud still struggling to get away from those sacks. So there is that part of it as well. Tyke Smith, that's the big name from Tampa Bay this week. I mean, Servassier Dennis as well, but Tyke Smith's usage, the production in week 1, this points to a high-end safety option for IDP. He played about 40% of his snaps in the box, led the team in total tackles. He is, I would say, arguably the top waiver target at the position where he's available, considering the usage, the production, but also a favorable matchup here this week against the Houston Texans. The Texans allowed 17 total tackles to the safety position in week 1. That was 5th most at the position. Again, it's important not to overreact to that data after just 1 week, but this was true of the Texans last season as well, right? And so I think they should continue to be a favorable matchup for our IDP safeties. Same thing with Antoine Winfield Jr. He's perfectly fine. I got him as safety 14 this week. On the Houston side of things, Azeez Al-Shaair, Henry To'o, they're the only linebackers in Houston worth trusting here. They could be starters. They're both full-time players. Again, there were plenty of IDP managers who were asking about EJ Speed this offseason because he was really effective with the Colts last year. EJ Speed was a non-factor in this game. He's not playing any snaps relevant for IDP right now, barring injuries. It'd probably take multiple injuries because Christian Harris also there. So yeah, EJ Speed can be safely dropped if you haven't done so already. Defensive back wise, CJ Gardner-Johnson, him being there kind of pushed Jalen Petrie out of a 100% snap role. It wasn't terrible for Petrie. I think it was around 90% or so. It could definitely be usable for IDP, but again, not playing 100% of snaps is going to push him down the ranks because, losing snaps is never ideal. So would rather play CJ Gardner-Johnson if you had to choose. But Petrie can still be fine. Defensive line wise, Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson. They're going to be starters for us. I don't need to provide much analysis there. Final Monday Night Football game for the week here. So what do we got? Los Angeles Chargers and the Las Vegas Raiders. Sorry, it's a lot of talking nonstop. I hope you guys are enjoying the information. Again, if you are, like and subscribe. It'll help me feel better about my throat being completely dry by the end of this. But let's start with the Los Angeles Chargers linebackers. Diane Henley off to a great start in week 1. We're going to continue to trust him. Now, LB2 gets somewhat interesting because Denzel Perriman suffered an ankle injury or high ankle sprain, something like that in week 1. He's out like 4 to 6 weeks, high ankle sprain. That's what it was. But he did play 73% of the defensive snaps before his injury. Troy Dye filled in for Perriman after that. He's only going to be a deep league option for us. He played 63% of the snaps once Perriman was out of the game. That's probably about where it's going to hover for Troy Dye. I'm not expecting a full-time role there. So really deep league option only. They played a lot of 3 safety looks in week 1 with Elijah Molden getting in there with Derwin James and Alohi Gilman. So just expecting more of that from the Chargers defense. And speaking of their defensive backs, Derwin James, easy choice to start. Once again, I got him as like safety 4 this week. Alohi Gilman is fine. More of a deep safety, though, 71% of snap. That's going to lead to more inconsistency more often than not. And then Tarheeb Still, he worked as the team's primary nickel corner and stayed on the field in non-nickel situations. So that put him in a full-time role. That was really encouraging to see. Didn't have the best IDP game, but his usage, I think, is good for cornerback required formats. Definitely encouraged there. Raiders also gave up the 7th most tackles to cornerbacks last week. So I got Tarheeb Still in that CB2 range. I think CB16 exactly. Defensive line for the Chargers. Nobody on that defensive line looked particularly good in week 1 against the Chiefs. Tuli Tuipulotu and Khalil Mack played the most, nearly 3/4 of the snaps each. So that should allow them to have better games going forward. Potentially as soon as this week, the Raiders offensive line was actually the 7th worst pass blocking unit in week 1. Geno Smith allowed the 7th highest pressure to sack conversion rate. So don't mind another swing on those 2 Chargers edge defenders if you need to. And final team of the week, the Las Vegas Raiders. So Devin White, let's start there. In a great position to produce consistently for IDP. Full-time role for the Raiders this season. The Raiders were the most zone-heavy defense in week 1. That helped White deliver a slightly above average tackle rate, which has not been the norm for him in recent years. So if White can actually hold this full-time role on defense specifically, he should be a consistent IDP starter for us on a weekly basis and should be in most starting lineups. I think I have him as LB 18 this week. On the other part of the linebacker core for Las Vegas, Landon Roberts suffered an elbow injury in the first quarter. He did not return. So it was Landon Roberts and Jermaine Pratt. They were likely to rotate at that LB2 spot throughout the game. We talked about that heading into week 1. And Roberts did play more than Pratt on the second drive of the game before he got hurt. So there was an indication that there was going to be a rotation there. However, because of the Roberts injury, much like what we saw in New York with Micah McFadden getting hurt, that pushed a likely rotation guy like Pratt into a near full-time role. So that was better for Pratt for sure. Pratt still played 28% of the snaps on the defensive line, which isn't typically ideal for tackle efficiency. However, as long as Roberts is out, Pratt will have value in deeper leagues. Defensive back-wise, Isaiah Polamau, he had a really nice IDP game. I still prefer Jeremy Chin. Chin saw significantly more valuable usage for IDP, for projecting forward for IDP. That keeps Chin really as the top safety option for the Raiders for me in what was an above-average tackle matchup for safeties, at least last week. And lastly, Max Crosby. He went right back into his 100% snap role to open 2025. Just ridiculous for a defensive lineman, especially one coming off a season-ending injury. Like Max Crosby, he landed a sack in that game. He's going to be a locked-in IDP starter for us going forward. And now he gets right tackle Trey Pipkins. Yes, please. The rest of the defensive line, though, not really worth trusting right now. Malcolm Kuntz only played 45% of snaps. Tyree Wilson played 54%. Neither had really encouraging metrics, so I'd be fine leaving those guys on benches, but nice to see for Max Crosby. Welcome back to him. All right, that is a wrap on the week 2 preview. There's, always so much more to go over coming out of week 1. So I appreciate you guys all tuning in and listening to me ramble for an hour and 17 minutes. I appreciate every single one of you. If there's anything that I missed or didn't cover, though, you have options. You could check out the IDP Weekly Fantasy Report, which is free coming out of week 1. Again, not sure if it will be going forward, but that has all the snap counts, alignment data, my notes, waiver targets, everything you can possibly need to dominate your IDP leagues, all in one article. So you'll find what you're looking for there. And if it is locked going forward, you could use the promo code PFF Fantasy Podcast 25 to get 25% off a PFF Plus subscription. And then you don't have to worry. You'll also get access to my rankings, which is the other option that we can access right now. Those are also out now. You could check those for clarity that you might need for any position. And yeah, also just feel free to ask questions in the YouTube comments. I'll try to get to them all. I know I missed a couple last week, which I wasn't too pleased with myself about. So I apologize for that. Sometimes the YouTube Studio app doesn't give me all the questions in an easy to access manner. But I will try to continue to answer all of those as I can. But that's enough from me this week. Thank you all again. Good luck in week 2. And until next time, peace out.